late comer to Bitcoin. I really only got involved in 2022. I was a climate tech investor at the time, and I started to ask the question about how much impact our fund was having and concluded it wasn't very much. So we went looking around for other technologies that could have a deeper climate impact. And much to our surprise, we found that Bitcoin mining could have a really positive climate impact. But that was not my impression when I first looked at it, because like a lot of people, I looked at it and thought it uses too much energy and it's not doing anything useful other than a speculative asset. But thankfully, I paused and took a deep breath and decided to do some research and challenge my initial reflexive negative impression of it. And as a result, I found some counterintuitive truths and really for my own edification started researching it more deeply, but shared the research results of what I've been finding. And much to my surprise, I found a whole community of Bitcoiners who I think had been maligned for a long time, particularly the Bitcoin mining community, who were very grateful that someone from the outside, I mean, I'm not on the outside now, but I was at the time, was doing independent research looking at the true environmental impact in a data-driven way and coming up with some very different conclusions to a lot of the mainstream narratives at the time, which were based on, to be frank, some pretty shoddy studies and assumptions.
It's super interesting. There was this famous, I forgot how it was called, but basically there was a study that forgot to include the difficulty adjustment, and they just made the assumptions without the difficulty adjustment in mind. Where I'm like, that's just lazy if you don't even include that, or you have an agenda.
Yeah, one or the two. It's always one of those two. Usually it's just lack of knowledge, but I would say in maybe 1 out of 5 cases there is an agenda. But all you need is one person with an agenda and then a whole lot of people who don't do the research, who assume that original piece of research was good quality where it wasn't, and that's how you get misinformation spreading and becoming very prevalent, which is exactly what happened.
How did you come over that? If you have the impression that Bitcoin is bad for the environment and you're like, okay, looking at that, how did you overcome that? Like what data-driven things that you see that you're like, okay, that actually is not true and it actually is the counterintuitive thing?
I've been wrong about things a lot in my life. And a lot of the times I've got it wrong is when I had an initial impression and I formed a judgment. So I think just over time and having made a lot of mistakes, I've learned that sometimes our initial impressions about things are not accurate. Some things have counterintuitive truths. I'll give you an analogy. So imagine if you're at the time of the Copernican revolution and this crazy person is claiming that the Earth revolves around the sun. And you say, well, that's obviously nonsense. I've got my own senses. I can see visually clearly that it's rising in the east every morning and it makes a circuit and it sets in the west. So clearly it's revolving around, the sun is revolving around the earth because our senses tell us this. But the counterintuitive truth, of course, that we discovered or rediscovered was that there are two revolutions. It's revolving around the sun at the same time as it's revolving on its axis, therefore creating the illusion that the sun revolves around the earth. So some things in life are counterintuitive, and it's only on deeper investigation that counterintuitive truth emerges. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes you do that at deeper analysis and you find out, well, my initial impression was right. But you have to suspend that disbelief. And as I say, I've been wrong about things a few times. And so I've just learnt over time not to place too much credence on an initial appraisal of anything. And so my tendency these days, if I haven't looked into something deeply, I won't make a judgment on it. For that reason, I don't make a whole lot of people ask me on my opinion on a whole bunch of things. And most of the time, answer is, I don't know, because my opinion isn't informed. I haven't looked into it deeply. But when I have, then I'm happy to say, well, this opinion is informed by some data, and I'm happy to share it. So I think it's just a radical process of self-scrutiny and learning through mistakes over time. And if we can be good at learning from our own mistakes and acknowledging when we make them, then I like to think that it makes us more curious people who are at least less likely to repeat the same mistakes.
I love that. And it's so hard because we have to normalize saying, I don't know. And people sometimes even get upset if you say, I don't know, because they think you're on the opposite side and you don't want to upset them or whatever is going on. Like if you, for example, in the beginning of the Ukraine war, I had no clue about that. I did not look anything up. I like nothing at all. And people are like, oh, like what's your stand on the Ukraine war? And I'm like, no clue. Like I haven't looked at anything, and they thought like, oh, like I use some Russian. Like no, like I really just like never looked at it, and I don't know. It's this saying like I don't know. I haven't formed an opinion on that. Is seeming not to be something that most people are comfortable doing. Like it's something unnormal.
Yeah, knowledge of ignorance is also knowledge, and so knowing where you have gaps in your understanding is really a precondition to being able to avoid more mistakes, avoid unnecessary judgment, avoid getting into arguments that are unnecessary. But also in the context of the work that I do as a coach, for example, it's absolutely critical. So if you're a CEO of a company, you have to know yourself and you have to know your gaps and your areas where you don't know stuff really well, because then you can recruit people who know the stuff that you don't know. It was exactly the same when I formed CH4 Capital. That's our infrastructure investment fund, which is doing Bitcoin mining, specializing in using landfill gas as the power source to turn it into electricity, use it to mine Bitcoin in remote places. Do you think I knew about landfills? Do you think I knew about carbon credits? Do you think I knew about Bitcoin mining at any deep degree? And I certainly didn't know about infrastructure financing. So there were already 4 pretty major areas that I didn't know. But knowing that I didn't know it meant that I could embark on the task of saying, well, there's 2 paths. Either I learn about it, that's going to be long and hard, or better, I find people who know the stuff that I don't know. And that's normally a lot shorter and easier. And that's what I did. And we formed a company who now have those incredible skills plugged. And my job is not to be the expert on anything, but to know the people who are and to know when to ask which person the right question. There was an anecdote about Henry Ford which really inspired me and also made me laugh. Apparently, there was a time when the US government was trying to break up Ford Corporation for being too monopolistic. And so there was a big antitrust inquiry. And Henry Ford had his 3 top advisors, and he was being scrutinized by some US Senate committee, I imagine. And they were asking all these questions. And Henry Ford wasn't answering a single one. He had his 3 top experts, and he just deferred to one, John, Charlie, Fred. And those are pretty much the only 3 words he said, were the 3 names. And after about 10 minutes of this US senator got quite irate and said, excuse me, Mr. Ford, I don't mean to be forward, but do you actually know anything about anything? And to which Henry Ford said, sir, it is not my job to be the expert. It is my job to know the people who are and ask them the right question. And I always remember that, and I thought that's really good advice, because to try to be the expert on everything, you're going to crash and burn. And Bitcoin is not just a monetary system, but it's really I think Troy Cross describes it as an epistemological humility test, because you have to acknowledge that there's so much about it that you just don't know. And if you pretend you know, or you pretend to yourself that you know about it, you'll be found out pretty soon. And so continuing to be curious in Bitcoin, not just in Bitcoin, but in anything, but Bitcoin's a good test case, is really important in terms of being able to further your understanding, deepen your understanding, and make a contribution.
Yeah, it's like I've now over 500 on my 506th podcast, and only on Bitcoin, like Bitcoin only, and I still have every week something like, oh, like I never thought about that perspective, or that I didn't know about that on Bitcoin. And like, when does the point come when there's like no new things coming? I don't know, probably never coming. There's always new things coming.
Because, yeah, knowledge is infinite, and even within a very, very, very small subsector of knowledge, you're discovering that even that's infinite. And even if you could know everything, then the next minute it would be different, because the world would have changed.
Absolutely. Real quick, I didn't know that you were coaching. Who are you coaching, and what is that doing?
Oh, that's something I've done for a little while now. So my background was with technology companies, and then after stepping down from one I'd founded, I really worked out that the biggest gap in the whole technology ecosystem was the ecosystem does a pretty good job in training you in the business side and training you on the product side and the hyperscaling side. That's pretty good. But where it's not so great is really scaling the human side. And sometimes we forget that it's humans that build companies, it's humans that build products, it's humans that create business models and the reason for business models being successful or not. And so we don't optimize the potential of the humans, both as individuals, but also the communication and connections between them. Then we're failing to optimize the most important thing in the success of a technology company. So I spent about a decade specializing in training founders in a bunch of things that I felt were incredibly important based on my own experience as a founder, and then branched out and started working with other leaders more generally. And recently I've been working with some Bitcoiners who are founding new ventures, some exciting stuff that I can't say too much about right now, but very exciting stuff. And again, working on the same thing, working on the combination of the skill set, the mindset, a little bit on the strategy and tactics, but that's not as important. If you're an athlete, if you're in a football team and you want to win, having the right game day strategy is important. But having a whole bunch of people who have the skills to be able to execute that strategy is 99% of what's important. So I focus on the stuff about the actual ability to execute upon a strategy, having the right mindset, the right skill set, the right behaviors, the right things you're doing, the actions you're taking on a day-to-day basis.
Super interesting. I did not know that about you that at all. One thing I've wanted with the environmental things to come back to that a little bit. When we look at the numbers that usually people portray in the mainstream media, and now it's getting a little less like that, they're like, looking at transaction costs, and they're looking at what energy is consumed per transaction, and then they scale it up. What data did you focus on when you first kind of focused on like if Bitcoin is actually bad or good for the environment, and what impact does it had? Like, what did you see like where Bitcoin is in the environmental impact?
Well, the first thing I noticed, and this wasn't me noticing it for the first time, many people had noticed it before and commented on it before, is that Bitcoin's energy use doesn't come from its transactions. So this was a made-up metric. And to give an idea of how you can make up a metric, let's imagine that you have a car, and through the course of a year, you like to play your radio in the car. Okay, so you can work out how many emissions your car is creating per year if it's a petrol-driven car. You can work out how many songs you're playing during a year. Therefore, based on this, you can work out the emissions per song that you play on the radio. Right? Now, you can see the flaw in that. It's very obvious that playing more songs on the radio doesn't cause you to emit more emissions in your car. And that's obvious. And you smile because everyone knows that. However, everyone knows how radios work, everyone knows how cars work, and everyone knows that the two are independent. But not everyone understands how Bitcoin works. And so because people don't understand that the way the transactions work, that's like playing songs on the radio, and the way that mining's working, that's like driving your car. When you say Bitcoin energy use per transaction, people don't go, what? That's stupid. That's crazy. Because into that knowledge gap, then all sorts of perversions of logic and of statistics are possible. And so it's a completely made up statistic. Now, we can smile at it, but the ironic thing is that misinformation is very pervasive. And so right now in the EU is trying to regulate based on energy use per transactions, a completely made up spurious metric. And And you don't have to take my word for it. This has been debunked 4 times in peer-reviewed literature. Anyone who knows anything about Bitcoin mining will tell you the whole thing, the same story. And of course, we know that through the Lightning Network, you can have millions, if not billions, of transactions, and it doesn't add a single bean to energy consumption. And so that's the first thing that I discovered. But the second thing is that we've kind of got into this pattern of thinking energy consumption bad, less energy consumption good, which is just not so, because not all forms of energy consumption are the same. So just in the same way, imagine if you were overweight. You're not, you look in good shape, but imagine if you were, and you went to a health practitioner, said, hey, I want to lose weight. And the health practitioner says, well, that's simple, eat less food. Now, it's not great advice. And the reason it's not great advice is it's not that, for one thing, food's only one component, but put that to one side. The type of food you eat, I'm sure you'd agree, is more important than the quantity. So if you're eating a large quantity of lettuce each day, it's actually taking more energy to consume that lettuce than the energy you get from the lettuce. So in other words, the more lettuce you eat, the more weight you will lose. So you don't need to decrease your lettuce consumption. You don't need to decrease your consumption of fruit or of vegetables. You may want to decrease your consumption of other forms, such as chocolate cake. So in the same way, when it comes to consumption of, so food's just a form of energy, and not all energy sources are the same. They have different impacts. And similarly with energy on the grid, not all forms of energy consumption are the same. If you have a very inflexible type of energy consumer, such as an AI data center, in fact, that's worse than inflexible, because it's not only inflexible, but its energy pattern spikes unpredictably, which makes it very hard for a grid operator to counterbalance. And it also means that because they have very high energy requirements and they can't be down, then you tend to have to back it up with baseload sources of electricity, which is going to be hydro, nuclear, or fossil fuel. And if you don't live in a place which has a lot of rain or gravity combined, you won't have hydro. And if you don't live in a place which has had a lot of investment in nuclear energy, you won't have nuclear, which means your options are limited. So it basically means fossil fuel. And there's been a lot of studies that have been done that show that more AI data centers means more fossil fuel-based energy generation is necessary on the grid. So AI data centers, that's kind of like your chocolate cake as an energy consumption. Bitcoin mining, that's more like your fresh fruit and vegetable. That's exactly the thing you want more of. And again, we have a lot of peer-reviewed studies that back this up. The more consumption you have coming from flexible users of energy, and there is no more flexible user of energy than Bitcoin mining. Sean Connell calls them the Rolls-Royce of flexible load. Of course, you can shut them off and back on again in less than 500 milliseconds. They can be shut off for days, and they can deliver that power back at a very modular level. You can shut off exactly the amount that you want to balance grids, which is tremendously valuable. And when you have more flexible energy consumption on a grid, the more you have, that means 2 things. Number one, it means you can reduce the need for gas peaker plants, which is these plants you have that just sit and idle all year, just for that one peak event where they need to fire up and supply more energy. So you can actually get rid of them. And that's exactly what happened in Texas. They didn't need to make an $18 billion investment in gas peaker plants to counterbalance their proliferation of solar and wind-based energy. They used Bitcoin mining instead. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that you can build out your grid using more renewable energy because you have this load balancer. So if the sun goes behind a cloud, the wind stops blowing, you can instantly ramp down power consumption. And people say, well, you can use batteries to do that. Well, you can to an extent, but batteries can only discharge for so long. They like to be discharged the same day. And often battery operators don't have an economic incentive to do it until the price is really high. In other words, until there's already an emergency. Whereas Bitcoin mining companies are much more price sensitive. So the moment wholesale electricity price moves up even a fraction, which is a reflection that demand has increased, they will power down instantly. So they tend to exercise their delivery of power back to the grid much sooner. And the other thing is that sometimes people say, well, that's all very well, they can stop using energy. Is that really their only function? Well, no, it's not. because there's more variable renewable energy on the grid in the first place, because they have incentivized the build out of renewable energy. How? Two ways, as I mentioned, by counterbalancing its intermittency, but also by being a first customer. So, in other words, a solar operator, a wind operator, before they even get grid interconnected, they can have a Bitcoin mining company co-located even before they're grid interconnected, paying them money, which means they're more economically viable. And because they're more economically viable, they're more likely to get financed. And because they're likely to get financed, then it's a going proposition, which will get grid interconnected. And also, because they get profitable sooner, that renewable generator can do what any prudent business operator does, and that's plow their profits back into expanding their renewable operation. And that's exactly what has been happening at scale. And this is no longer theory. We hypothesized about this, but now we've seen evidence of this around the world. It's one of the reasons that TEPCO in Japan, Japan's largest utility, is using Bitcoin mining. It's the reason that Deutsche Telekom is using Bitcoin mining. It's the reason that Kango, who's got into renewable energy, has got into Bitcoin mining. And it's the reason that ERCOT has been using more than 3 gigawatts of Bitcoin mining. And the reason that it's been able to increase their variable renewable energy from 80 gigawatts up to 140 gigawatts within 3.5 years. We've got 20 scientific papers that back up its numerous climate benefits. We've got 7 independent studies that do that as well now. So the narrative really has shifted. When I was first researching this, I suspected these things were true, but I couldn't really see a lot of evidence in terms of case studies and documented studies that were showing it. And so people said, well, that sounds like greenwash. Well, we know now it's not. It's happening. It's happening at scale. And it's happening in many jurisdictions around the world, and it's only increasing. So not only is Bitcoin mining not an environmental problem, we've actually realized that it's a key part of many environmental solutions.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.